guys, Kim here from CustomDollBaby.com. I'm back for the second time today. So we've been talking a lot about complexion layers, and it just so happens that I'm working on a biracial Chanel doll. I don't know what nationality she is, but she's gonna have some complexion to her. So I thought this would be a great opportunity to show you how I paint my African American, biracial, Latin American dolls. It's a little different from what I do with the Caucasian babies. I use some of the pre-mixed paints and some I modify to match the picture that I'm looking at. So I get a lot of questions about biracial dolls, so I thought I'd go ahead and record this too. As I mentioned, this Chanel doll is a portrait of a real baby, so the first thing that I always do when I'm painting a portrait is really study the pictures of the real baby and get a sense of what the complexion looks like on different parts of her body. I'll do a comparison to see what her complexion is compared to mine, because it's always very natural to use yourself as a reference palette. So I'm a very yellow tone person. She's more of a rosy tone baby, so that'll be something to keep in mind as we're mixing our paints. And then once I've got a good idea in my head of what she looks like, we're going to make a color selection. So for this baby, because she has those rosy undertones, I think Flesh 03 is going to be a really good place to start. It's a nice neutral colored brown, and we can always tweak it and use our color wheel to make some slight changes in the color. I probably won't do Flesh 03 end to end, but it's going to make a really nice foundation for our future layers of paint. So I'm just getting this 08 out of my palette. The other reason why I decided to record this is because when I paint an African American or a biracial doll, it's a little different from what I do when I'm painting a Caucasian baby. The first thing that you'll notice that's different is that I make the paint a lot more concentrated. So I'm going to make a decent amount of paint here, but compared to what you were seeing with the Flesh 08, for the Flesh 03, I'm going to really lather quite a lot of it into the well, because it takes a lot of layers for the vinyl to start to pick up on that color. So I want to make sure I have a good concentration of it out of the gate. So using the odorless paint thinner, just going to allow me to control both the concentration as well as the amount of color that I'm making. So as you can see, it's already getting pretty dark. Don't worry, it's not going to be that dark on the doll after we have applied an ultra thin layer. And so as you can see, I'm doing this in a much higher concentration than I did with my Caucasian babies. If I felt like I wanted to make it darker, at this point I would add a little bit of raw sienna. If it was getting too rosy, add a little ultramarine blue. As I said, we can kind of tweak it to our preferences. But what I'm seeing right now is looking very good for that rosy complexion that she has. And I'm sure you're cringing like, are you out of your mind, lady? The kid's not that dark, but I promise it's not gonna look that dark unless it's been applied to the doll. So because this is a newborn doll, I'm looking for a nice tiny shader brush, because I'm going to need that in order to paint her fingers. So these are a little frayed for my taste. I think this one will probably get the job done. This is another little Cornell brush. And it's a nice tiny shader, which is going to help me get those fine details on the doll. Okay, this is a full vinyl leg, which is very nice because the doll will be able to wear just a onesie and look nice without any cloth body showing. I've got my clean, non-porous or less porous sponge. I've got a clean porous sponge that I'm going to use to apply the paint. I've got the mop brush that I use to mix the paint. That's also going to help me to get into some of those hard to reach places. The last thing I'm going to need is a dry brush to help me pounce some of that color out. Now, if you're alternating between Caucasian babies and biracial babies, you want to make sure that you keep your dry brushes separate from one another, because you will start to transfer paint between those two dolls. So just something to keep in mind. If you've seen the tutorial on my blog about painting hands and feet, you're already aware that I like to start on the fingers and toes. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to get some of the paint on the shader brush and very daintily paint the very tops of the toes from the nail bed down into the rest of the doll. I'm making a kind of a round shape, and you want to be cognizant of the posing of the toes so you know exactly where to stop your complexion color. Trying to make sure the paint isn't too wet because it will drip, and this is a time when we don't want that to happen. So we're trying to create a boundary between the top of the foot and the sole of the foot. Okay, so I'm painting this as neatly as I can from the toenails down. And then I'm going to create a boundary along the side of the foot. Usually about halfway down, and you want to marry it up to the toes that you just painted. There's usually a crease here at the heel. That's where you want to start bringing your line up. And we'll do the same thing on the other side. So we've got kind of a nice fat foot here. So we want to follow the contours of the foot. A little bit lower here. Okay. And then we've got this fat area, so I'm going to bring it down a little bit there and meet it back up to where I painted that toe. Okay, so that looks very bizarre, but that's how we start to make sure that we're landing the complexion color in the right place. I can go back with my mop brush, or you can continue to use your shader brush and fill in that boundary a little bit more. I think that may be how I did it in the other video, or I don't know, it's kind of been a while. Okay. And now you're thinking, oh my gosh, it looks so dirty. That's okay, when we go back and blot it off, it will be perfect. Trust me. Or you can just wait and see if you don't trust me. That's okay. There's so many instructional videos that I've watched and I'm thinking, oh no, you're ruining it. And then I get to the end and it's like, oh, all right, that's great. Well, apparently you do know what you're doing. As usual, we're gonna get into these corners, these places that the brush is gonna have a hard time reaching. The sponge, sorry. And then I'm gonna take the more porous sponge and add the rest of my color. And remember how I was saying that there's a special way that I paint the head because I really need to get the complexion on all at one time in order to get an even tone for biracial and African American babies. Now you can see why that's the case. I mean, every place I land this blush, this sponge, I'm getting a very different color. It's looking very uneven and weird and awful. So it's very important to apply that color as quickly as possible and blot it off as quickly as possible. Otherwise it's gonna start to dry and that's gonna create uneven skin tone on your piece. That was a long sentence. I hope it made sense. It's kind of hard to paint and narrate at the same time. Okay, I'm gonna go over this foot area a little bit more. I just want it well coated, and I'm sure you're thinking, what in the world? This looks so bad. But fear not, here I come with my other brush. And we're gonna try to do these in very straight lines. So I'm hoping you can see the whole piece here. Just gonna work my way down. See how much color we lose when we do that? Blot it off as you go. And don't worry too much about that boundary that we painted on the foot, because we're going to clean that up later. So notice I'm like blotting all the way down to, but not quite across, the boundary line that we painted with the shader brush. Clean it up some, but I'm not gonna worry about getting it perfect at this point. So there's a little bit of moisture left on the sponge. I'm just gonna use that to spread around a little more to get more even complexion here. So making sure I didn't miss any juicy areas. Yeah, I like to fluctuate with the darker colors. You definitely can see where you put it. It is very apparent. Okay, so that's looking pretty good for the blotting. I'm going to use my regular mop to dig out the color from the creases. I mean, we are going to paint the creases later, but you know, you want to paint them purposefully, not just let paint hang out in there because you didn't want to deal with it. Okay, now here's the important part. It's all important, but this is more important. I'm just going to blot this a little bit more. Okay, so now we need to blend those complexion layers down to a seamless finish. So I'm going to start us here on the side. I'm going to take this brush, it's a number 4 Nicole brush, which I love, love, love for my shading and blending. And what I'm doing is I'm basically using the brush to dab off what we just painted on and to also spread it around a little bit, because we don't want to see a well-defined line where the complexion stops. We want it to be a little more seamless. Actually, I'm going to use it to dig some color out of the creases too. And I'm going to do it on the toes. So as you can see, the toes have had time to dry while I was painting everything else, but that's okay, because all we want to blend at this point are the sides. And we're going to have to do this for every single layer. If you have a lot to blend, you can also use your sponge to pick some of that color up. Also notice that I'm resting the foot on a sponge, so that way I can do the pouncing that I need to do and I can do the blending that I need to do without disturbing the paint that's already there. Same deal here, just going to spread that around. And dab it with the sponge one more time just to make it a little more seamless. Use your sponge to blend it too. I just like to use the brush so I can have as much control as possible over where I'm landing the color. And in your subsequent layers, you might go all the way to that line. You may stop a little bit before it and blend the paint down to that line. You can do it however you like, just to make sure that you create that boundary and blend it to a seamless finish. So that is our first complexion layer on this doll. As always, we're gonna let it dry while I paint the rest of the doll and inspect it to make sure that we don't have too much paint anywhere. That can still happen even with these complexions. And then we're gonna bake it at 60% power on the New Wave oven. That's 250 degrees Fahrenheit for 8 to 9 minutes. And that's all the time I have for today. I hope that was helpful. If you have any questions, please feel free to drop them in the comments and on the blog. Thanks for watching, and thank you for reborning with me.